Good morning, St. Augustine. Your access to the voices of top local newsmakers starts now. Here's your host, Liz Ryan.
Good morning, St. Augustine. Today we're chatting with Hunter Miller of Oceana. Good morning, Hunter.
Good morning, Liz. Good to be with you.
Nice to have you. Thank you for taking the time to chat today. Tell me a little bit about Oceana and the important work they do.
Well, Oceana is the world's largest international ocean conservation, and we focus solely on protecting the world's oceans. Our international headquarters is located in Washington, D.C., and we have offices around the world, all working to pass policies to protect our oceans and to protect our communities that rely on them.
Oceana is a worldwide organization, but you happen to live right here in St. Augustine, right?
I am lucky enough to live in St. Augustine, Florida, yes.
Tell me, Hunter, a little bit about your background.
Well, I am sixth-generation Floridian, and I grew up in Florida in the central part of our state, and I didn't live at the beach, but, man, I loved going to the beach every chance I could get, and I ended up going to Flagler College right here in St. Augustine and just absolutely fell in love with this community and saw what a treasure it is, and was lucky enough to work in the community after I graduated in 2011. And in 2017, I had the opportunity to take my passion for advocating for the environment and working to protect our oceans. And I started with Oceana and moved to the St. Pete area, where I was really working to protect our coast from proposed offshore drilling off our shores, as well as working on plastic policies within the state of Florida. And just about a year ago, a little over a year ago, I was able to come back home, move back to St. Augustine with my wife and my daughter. And we are based here now, but my work is not exclusive to this area. I work mostly on federal ocean policy, but as we're going to talk about today, also work on state policy and sometimes on local policy as well. So I find it to be like a real privilege to get to work on this stuff as my job, and couldn't do it with community members and folks that also share this passion and love for our oceans, our beaches, and the place that we live.
Legislation that you're very proud of is regarding balloon releases. Tell me what this legislation says.
Well, I would just say if you're a lover of the ocean and you dislike plastic pollution, you're going to really love a bill called HB 321, Release of Balloons. And what this bill essentially does is prohibit the intentional release, the intentional littering of balloons into the air. And it also gets rid of a provision that allows for the unlimited release of biodegradable balloons. There's also a $150 fine if you are cited for releasing balloons. The reason why this is important is because I think for many of us, we realize that plastic pollution and pollution into our oceans is a really bad problem. Scientists estimate that 33 billion pounds of plastic enter our ocean every year. And this is a growing crisis. And one of the most common types of marine debris that we as humans can easily reduce is balloon litter. So this bill's really great because common sense. We know that balloons can be really harmful and even kill some of our most iconic marine species like sea turtles and dolphins and seabirds. So, we're really celebrating this hard-fought victory and see it as a great way to protect our coastlines and ocean wildlife from harm. And, hopefully educate folks about the potential harms when we release balloons, that they don't disappear. They have to come back down to Earth, whether that's in our oceans or thousands of miles away in the Everglades or in our rivers or in our neighborhoods, up in our trees.
Hunter, what goes up must come down. And if a balloon that goes up comes down into the ocean, a sea turtle, for example, could mistake it for a jellyfish or a food that the turtle eats every day. What happens if a turtle takes a bite out of a balloon?
That's a really great question. And like you said, when these balloons come back down, say, for instance, into our oceans, it's not just the balloons, it's also the ribbons the plastic ribbons and attachments that are often attached to them, they really do present a threat. So there's really a couple things that can happen. One, a turtle can become entangled in the ribbon, which can choke them or make it very hard for them to move and stress out a sea turtle. Or, the sea turtle can ingest a balloon, which can be very harmful. As you mentioned, when a balloon falls into the ocean and it's floating there in the water column, it looks strikingly like one of sea turtles' favorite foods, jellyfish. They're really attractive. The balloons are bright colored and they attract wildlife. They want to explore and try things out. So oftentimes sea turtles and frankly other marine species and marine wildlife will mistake that balloon for food and ingest that. And so that can be really harmful because when an animal swallows a balloon, it can block its intestinal tract and it can lead to starvation and even death. And there's some really grueling photos and instances where that's happened along Florida's coastlines, and we have, really are blessed to have our beaches be critical habitat for sea turtles, and we want to do everything we can to protect them. And this law is definitely going to have an impact on saving sea turtles and other marine life from these kind of preventable deaths.
And what is the fine or the penalty for releasing balloons?
Yeah, that's a great question. So now balloons are treated like other litter. In Florida, if you are caught littering, it is a $150 citation. The other thing with this bill is that there is an exemption for children ages 6 and under. That just provides additional protections for children. I don't think law enforcement will be targeting children in any way. And really this is more so about educating folks about the harm of mass balloon releases rather than looking to cite everyone we can. But it is the law. So those big balloon releases are now illegal, and you could face a fine of $150 if a law officer saw you and decided to give you a citation.
I know you by now, Hunter, and I know you're a nice guy, and you're not a killjoy, and you're not out to rob anybody of having fun or participating in some kind of a memorial ceremony, which often includes balloon releases. So what would you suggest people do as an alternative to releasing balloons?
Yeah, I think that's such a great point, Liz, and I'm really glad you brought that up because over, many decades, I think balloon releases have been a way in which folks can celebrate, mark an occasion, or commemorate a lost loved one. On the large scale, we've seen like college sports stadiums, big college football games do huge releases and NASCAR races. And as, these entities have learned about the harms of these big, massive balloon releases, they've gone to alternatives. And I think the same is true for our community members. Once we learn about the potential harm that we can cause with doing balloon releases, I think it makes sense that we explore alternatives. And I can give you a list of some of my favorites. My absolute favorite is going down to your local nursery and planting a native tree in remembrance of someone. This is something that you can revisit. It's going to enhance your community and your neighborhood. It's going to provide habitat and shade for years to come, and it'll have a lasting legacy. There's other things that you can do as a group, like candle vigils, flying kites, blowing bubbles, planting gardens, pollinator gardens. And if you go to balloonsblow.org, there's a whole list of alternatives that are really, really great ideas. So you can swap out some of those activities with balloon releases and make a positive impact rather than putting our wildlife at risk and potentially polluting our environment.
I think education is always an effective tool. And I think if people do a simple Google search online of photos, I mean, if you can stomach it, but photos of animals, birds, turtles that have swallowed balloons or gotten tangled up in the ribbon from a balloon, then it really hits home when you see the visual. Then, this isn't just people being a Karen, and I hate that expression, but people being a Karen or people being, overly worried about the environment. So if you really see the photos, and I think they're easy to come across online, then you'll understand the importance of this law.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. These photos are really hard to stomach, and wildlife is affected, but it's not just wildlife. I think also, I've learned a lot about balloons and some of the issues that they've caused. There are, if you do a Google search about balloons, mylar balloons causing power outages, there's so many examples of major power outages happening from balloons being entangled at power lines. Balloons can clog storm drains. Big balloon releases can interrupt aviation traffic. There's a whole host of other negative impacts from releasing balloons, not just the threat to wildlife. So, in the middle of the summer, we don't want our power to go off and the AC to quit running because a balloon got entangled in a power line. So there's a lot of different reasons why this is important. I mean, from Oceana's perspective, our goal is to protect our communities and protect the wildlife, off our coastline. So, but there are many different reasons why this is important, and those visceral images quickly show you why you wouldn't want to intentionally do that.
So this law, if I understand correctly, bans balloon releases, but it doesn't ban the sale of helium balloons and mylar balloons and so forth. So what do you recommend people do if they do have these balloons in their home or at a party to dispose of them in a way that won't harm wildlife?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and what we saw during this legislative session is that we actually had support from retailers in the Florida Retail Federation. Our nation's biggest balloon lobby, believe it or not, was also supportive of this measure, because even manufacturers of balloons know that a balloon that chokes a sea turtle is bad for business for them. And so this makes sense to our retailers and our manufacturers that create these products. There's a responsible way to have balloons at a party or something similar to that. It's basically keeping them tied down to weight or to structures so they don't fly away. When you give a child a balloon in their hand, they're probably going to let it go. So if you're going to do that, let it be inside. But at the end of the party, the thing to do is to pop the balloons and secure them in the right trash location so they don't get into the environment. And then the number one thing is don't let them go. They can cause some harm, and dispose of them properly.
Hunter, how did the idea of banning balloon releases come about in the first place?
That's a really great question, and I think the really cool part is that Northeast Florida, and particularly St. Augustine and Jacksonville, have a big part to play in this story. Other states have banned the release of balloons, but Florida, had an outdated law surrounding balloon releases. And this idea, I think, really was created from people that walk the beaches here in Northeast Florida every day. There's a woman named Nicole Crosby who started a group called Never Endangered Sea Turtles, and really became a loud and strong vocal voice for educating our community about the harmful nature of releasing balloons. And so Nicole and others really got to work locally in passing local ordinances banning the intentional release of balloons. And that's a really important part of this story. So, with Nicole and other organizations working to educate and pass policies at the local level, that really provides the foundation to make the case at the state level that, hey, we've just passed an ordinance in St. Johns County and St. Augustine and Duval County and all these beach communities. We really need a comprehensive law in Florida so that we're not piecing together all these individual policies. And so I really give a ton of credit to Nicole and others who have worked around the state to pass these local policies, but also to educate our community about the issue. And I think it was a really critical piece to us being where we are today.
You're listening to Good Morning St. Augustine. I'm your host, Liz Ryan, and I'm honored to be speaking with Hunter Miller this morning of Oceana. Hunter, what are some of the other things besides balloons that wildlife can choke on?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. Oceana works extensively to fight plastic pollution entering our oceans. Plastic pollution is such a pervasive item that we find in our oceans, and it's a growing problem. I think we've all seen, videos and pictures of, giant plastic islands in our oceans and plastic and littered beaches. And then unfortunately we all, it's hard to go on a paddle or a boat ride or go to the beach without seeing some type of plastic pollution. And so we've been working really hard to pass policies like the balloon bill, but other policies that really get at the source of the problem, which is, especially for myself, I've been to so many beach cleanups, and I love beach cleanups. I love to see all the trash that we can pick up. But if you've been to many beach cleanups, you'll know that it's just it's not solving the problem. It's addressing the symptoms of a problem. Because if you go back, a few months later, you're going to be picking up pretty much the same amount of trash as that was there before. And so I think there's a lot of really common sense things that we can do at every level of government to reduce the amount of plastic at the source, and so that we're not creating so much of this waste, and that we are finding new innovative systems to introduce things like circular systems and reusable systems. And there's some great examples locally where that's being done.
Are we making strides in, for example, producing biodegradable utensils?
I think innovation has a big part of that. And so there's a couple issues, and I end up talking about this quite a bit with folks when we talk about plastic pollution. And whenever bioplastics have really hit the scene, if you cared about plastic pollution, it's something really to get excited about. Unfortunately, there's some real limitations to, quote unquote, bioplastics. Folks will get bioplastic cups, right? And kind of feel guilt-free, but unfortunately, bioplastics are oftentimes still have some type of plastic material in the chemistry of the product. The other hard part is if they're, quote, compostable, they're not backyard compostable. So, throwing them in the woods or in your compost bin, those are going to take a very, very long time to decompose. Most of all the commercial grade bioplastics, whether it's utensils or clamshells or cups, really need what's called an industrial composting facility. And Florida does not have an industrial composting facility. They're very, very expensive to create. And the other thing, too, is that, bioplastic looks like plastic. That's why they're popular. But it's confusing. A lot of times people will throw their bioplastic into the recycling bin and contaminate that recycling. They're not recyclable. So when you throw them plastic biocups in the recycling bin, it contaminates your recycling, and it is confusing for consumers. And there are kind of some false promises around bioplastics. It's not to say that innovation and improvements on the technology can't be done and shouldn't be done. We're just not quite there yet. And so I think for folks to think about reusable systems, my favorite local example is the work that the St. Augustine Amphitheater has done. I think they initially, had a really strong culture for sustainability. They still do, really fantastic group. And initially, went with the bioplastic cups for all the different beverages that they're selling at the amphitheater for these really big concerts. But the leadership at the AMP at the time was Ryan Murphy, quickly found out the same limitations that I just described about bioplastics, and thought, well, we can't do this. This isn't a real solution. So they worked to do have a reusable cup system. So while they're having plastic cups, they have a system where a customer puts down a deposit on that cup, and will get that deposit back when they return the cups to the bins. And those cups get reused over and over, and they're sanitized. And so speaking with Gabriel Pellissier, who's now the manager at the amphitheater, I don't have the number on hand, but the amount of waste, plastic waste that they save every year even every show is staggering. So they're actually saving money and saving the environment at the same time. And I think that's just such an amazing example for a very large scale, events location to be doing something like this. And it shows that if you just put some effort into it and look at your options, you can save money and save the environment. So I think that's a really great example locally.
You're listening to Good Morning St. Augustine, and we're chatting with Hunter Miller of Oceana. We're talking about plastics polluting our environment, posing a danger to wildlife. I think by now it's gone viral, Hunter, and we've all seen the picture online of that poor turtle with the straw up its nose. And you can debate whether or not that picture is real or whether it's photoshopped, but it is heartbreaking. Are those paper straws that can be a little bit annoying? They can stick to your lips. They can fall apart much faster than a regular straw. But do those paper straws make a difference?
Well, I think there's a whole mix of solutions. I think straws are, a single-use plastic item. So it's something that we use once, and then that straw is going to be around for, almost indefinitely. And that straw will break down into microplastics and not be good for our health or our environment. Paper straws, like you said, they don't perform in the same way, but they do provide an alternative. And if you go down to our local farmers market, you'll see other alternatives. You'll see silicone straws and glass straws and stainless steel straws. So paper straws are one solution for on-the-go, quick alternative. But I think, looking at the, larger picture of different alternatives, I think that, when we look at the actual problem and what's at stake, we have to think about different alternatives to single-use plastic. And really, there are parts of our lives that plastic's really important, right? So in the medical field, we need plastics there. The bumpers of our cars, these are important pieces of plastic that, make our lives function. A big section of the plastic production and use is in single use. We're talking about plastic that's going to be used for momentarily, plastics, and largely in packaging. And there's lots of different alternatives and ways around and tackling this packaging portion of the plastic pollution problem. So yeah, that's I know one that it gets a lot of attention as straws, but I think it's the larger picture when you see the issue of plastics being so pervasive, getting into our water, our bodies. Studies found microplastics in human placentas, heart tissue. Something's got to give, and we as a nation, as a world, really should be looking to do whatever we can to kind of tackle this problem and provide as many options for people as possible.
Well, you think of how many millions of tons of plastic we could keep out of the landfill every year if every one of us could eliminate one single-use plastic item per day. For example, a bag at the supermarket, by bringing your own reusable canvas bags. If we all did that, we'd save thousands of tons of plastic from the landfill. And another example is this. It might be a little bit embarrassing at first, but you get used to it. If you go into a restaurant, bring your own Tupperware. Instead of using a styrofoam to-go container from the restaurant, coming home and throwing it away the next morning after you eat your leftovers, why not just reuse your own Tupperware?
I think that's an example of something you can do on the individual level, and I think all that stuff is really important. But, I really want to stress, too, that as an individual, as a consumer, it's super difficult to avoid single-use plastic. For instance, if I go to the grocery store, it's hard for me to walk out there without a ton of plastic. And so I think as consumers, we have to demand plastic-free choices and options. I think we don't, in many, many cases, have an option to buy plastic-free items or items that are not a potato wrapped in plastic. There needs to be options for us to not have to encounter this item. We're seeing more of that. A great store, The Inlet down in Summer Haven, a new store that a local couple opened. They largely have a plastic-free store. They have no plastic bottles, and so they have totally given us a great example of plastic-free choices. And so I want to commend businesses and corporations that give us plastic-free options, because as much as our role as individuals is important, it's important for us to have the option to opt out of having to be inundated by plastic. And, our laws need to reflect that too, to kind of phase out some of the most problematic types of single-use plastics and invest in that innovation that we talked about earlier.
I think we've become so conditioned as a society to see everything encased in plastic. They're actually selling peeled oranges, one orange, in its own plastic bubble. Do we really need to put a plastic bubble in the landfill just to have the convenience of a peeled orange?
I think God really did a great job creating the best biodegradable packaging ever in the orange peel. It protects the fruit, and it's gone in a matter of weeks, and no pollution there. So yeah, I think some of the stuff you see with plastic wrapping really does kind of boggle the mind, and that is certainly a great example of kind of just some things that just, all right, that's really obvious,
And on that note, I think I'll grab myself a nice glass of orange juice on this Sunday morning. Hunter Miller of Oceana, what do you think you'll do with the rest of your Sunday?
I like to go straight to the ocean with my family and enjoy the places that we're advocating for. So you will find me in the ocean on Sunday today, and I will be swimming with my family. If there's any surf, then we're going to be surfing and just being happy in our community. And really fantastic to be with you. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, Hunter, and thank you for all you do and all the hard work that Oceana does to help keep our environment clean and our animals safe.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
This is Liz Ryan. Thank you for listening to Good Morning St. Augustine. We'll see you back here next week. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday in our beautiful, historic, ancient city.